He had watched kingdoms of emotion crumble in other men. He had witnessed grown lords weep at the altar, poets surrender their fortunes, and soldiers lay down swords, all in the name of a feeling he had long since decided was nothing more than a magnificent lie. Love, to his grace, Nathaniel Ashworth, the 8th Duke of Ravensmoor, was a pretty word stitched onto a treacherous blade, beautiful to behold and devastating to touch. He had made his peace with that conviction, until the night of the 14th of October, when the autumn rain fell upon Ashworth Park like a curtain of silver thread, and he saw her. But before we go any further into this story, if you are new here, welcome to the Duke's Lost Letters, the place where Regency hearts break beautifully and love always finds its way through the fog. If these stories move you, if they make your pulse quicken and your breath catch, please do take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Every single subscription is what keeps these stories alive. It costs you nothing, and it means absolutely everything. Now, let us return to the rain. Let us return to her. Her name was Miss Cecelia Vane, second daughter of the late and deeply indebted Baron Vane of Northshire. She had arrived at Ashworth Park 3 days prior, accompanying her elder sister, Miss Arabella Vane, who had come at the express invitation of the Duchess Dowager to be considered, not so subtly, as a potential match for the Duke himself. Cecelia had not been invited for any such purpose. She was there, as she often was, in the grand theatre of her family's ambitions, as an ornament. A quiet, well-mannered ornament who poured tea without spilling it and laughed at precisely the right moments during dinner. She had learned, over the course of 24 years, to make herself invisible in rooms that did not want her, and she had mastered the art with heartbreaking perfection. The Duke had noticed her at supper the first evening, only briefly, a flash of dark eyes above the rim of a crystal glass, a mouth that seemed to be suppressing something more interesting than whatever polite conversation demanded of it. He had catalogued her the way he catalogued all things of mild curiosity, efficiently, dispassionately, and then not at all. He was, after all, a man of extraordinary discipline. But discipline, it seems, has its limits. On that 14th night, sleep had refused him. The Duke rose at midnight, wrapped himself in his dark dressing-coat, and descended to his library, that vast, cold cathedral of leather and candlelight that had always been his truest sanctuary. He poured himself 2 fingers of brandy, settled into the great chair beside the window, and opened a volume of Tacitus he had already read 4 times. It was the movement that caught his eye first. Through the tall library window, beyond the stone balustrade and the iron garden gate, a figure moved in the darkness. The rain had softened to a fine misting curtain of silver, and against it, wearing nothing warmer than a white muslin nightgown and a loosened shawl that the wind had nearly claimed entirely, was Cecelia Vane. She was dancing. Not the careful, measured steps of the ballroom, not the performance of a woman observed. She moved as though the garden belonged to her. Arms lifted, head thrown back, bare feet on the wet grass, turning slow circles in the rain as though it were music she alone could hear. Her dark hair had come entirely free of its pins and streamed behind her like ink dissolving in water. Her face, tilted upward, wore an expression of such unguarded, luminous joy that the Duke felt something shift violently in his chest, something he had no name for, something he had spent 38 years ensuring he would never need to name. He did not move for a very long time. He simply watched her be free, in a world that had never once asked her to be. And if you are still with me, still feeling every drop of that rain, please pause for just one moment and subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters if you have not already done so. New stories arrive every week, and you will not want to miss what happens next in any of them. Now, back to our Duke, who who is about to make a terrible, wonderful mistake. He went to her. He did not intend to. He told himself as he set down Tacitus, as he crossed the library, as he unlatched the garden door, that he was merely acting in the propriety of a host, ensuring a best had not lost her senses entirely and wandered out into an October chill to court a fever. He told himself this very firmly. She heard the door and stopped. When she turned and saw him, the Duke of Ravensmoor, in his dressing coat, standing in the rain with an expression she could not at all decipher, the joy did not leave her face entirely, but it retreated. It folded itself behind propriety, the way a candle flame bends behind glass. "Your Grace," she said, and her voice was steady, though her breath came quick. "I beg your pardon. I could not sleep, and I—" She paused, swallowed. "I am afraid I cannot offer you a satisfactory explanation." "You were dancing," he said. It was not an accusation. It was barely even an observation. It was something closer to wonder, though he did not know his own face well enough to recognize it as such. "Yes," she said simply. And then, because she was Cecelia Vane, and she had always known how to be invisible, but had never quite learned to be dishonest, "I do it when no one is watching. The rain makes it feel like permission." Something in that sentence undid him. He stood in silence for a moment, the mist gathering in his dark hair, the cold entirely irrelevant. "Miss Vane," he said at last, "are you cold?" "Dreadfully," she admitted. "Then you ought to come inside." "Yes," she agreed, but neither of them moved. It was, by every standard of respectability, an outrageous scene. A duke and an unmarried young woman of modest means, standing alone together in a darkened garden at past midnight, both in states of considerable undress by the era's unforgiving measure. What neither of them knew as they stood there in that silver rain was that someone had. The Duchess Dowager's lady's maid, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Crowe, fiercely loyal to her mistress and deeply invested in securing the Duke's union with the elder Miss Vane, had seen everything. From the upper corridor window, and by breakfast, the Duchess Dowager herself knew precisely what had transpired in her garden. And she was not, to say the least, favorably inclined. The following morning arrived with the particular cruelty of a beautiful day indifferent to human suffering. Silver gleamed, and the air between the Duchess Dowager and Cecelia Vane was cold enough to extinguish every candle in the house. "Miss Vane," the Duchess said over the porcelain rims of the breakfast service, "I trust you slept well?" It was said with a smile that carried a blade inside it. Cecelia met her gaze without flinching. "Tolerably, Your Grace, thank you." The Duke, seated at the head of the table, said nothing, but his eyes moved to Cecilia's face and stayed there a moment too long. The Duchess noticed. By afternoon, a letter had been dispatched to the Vane household with grave urgency. By evening, it was understood, in the quiet and devastating language of polite society, that Miss Cecelia Vane's visit to Ashworth Park would be concluding rather sooner than planned. It was the Duke who intercepted her in the east corridor, where she was carrying her small leather traveling case toward the carriage. He appeared from the doorway of the library, the same library where it had all begun, and when he spoke her name, she stopped. "You are leaving?" he said. "I am," she replied. Her countenance was composed, but her eyes, those dark, extraordinary eyes, held something that cost her a great deal to keep still. Cecelia, he had not called her that before. The sound of it in his voice, low, almost pained, made her press her fingers harder against the leather handle of the case. "You should not," she whispered. "Your Grace, you know as well as I do what is proper, and what is right?" he interrupted, and the word fell between them like something thrown down. She stared at him. "I have spent my entire life believing that the sensible man does not dance in the rain." He paused. "I find I am no longer entirely convinced of my own philosophy, Miss Vane." A silence. Then very softly she laughed, that laugh she had been suppressing since the first supper, and it was to the Duke of Ravensmoor the most devastating sound he had ever heard in his 38 years. He held out his hand. She looked at it, looked at him, at the library door, at the great, cold, beautiful house that had never once offered her warmth, and she took it. He never did manage to finish that volume of Tacitus. It remained on the chair beside the window for the rest of that autumn, bookmarked at the page he had abandoned when a woman danced in the rain and ruined him gloriously for a quiet life. They were married the following spring, and on the night of their wedding, when the guests had retired and the candles burned low in the ballroom of Ashworth Park, when the musicians had packed their instruments and the last of the champagne had gone, the Duchess of Ravensmoor slipped off her silk slippers, stepped out through the garden door, and lifted her face to a light April shower. Her husband followed her without hesitation, and this time he danced too. If this story touched your heart, and I hope with everything I have that it did, please subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters right now. Leave a comment below telling me what you felt when she took his hand. Share this with someone who believes in love that arrives like rain, unexpected, inconvenient, and absolutely impossible to resist. I will see you in the next story, my dear listeners. Until then, may someone look at you the way a reformed cynic looks at the woman dancing alone in the rain.